mysterious mound, folklore and legend. A fortune teller's words come true. A sight unseen in centuries, the greatest icon of the Viking Age.
It is definitely the symbol of the Viking Age.
A vessel on its final voyage. A ship of beauty, a ship of the dead.
They clearly belong in the grave. This was their place to be.
A story of ingenuity, of one of the greatest excavations in Viking archaeology.
The two women of Oseberg are a mystery in every sense.
And the discovery of the most stunning and intriguing grave ship ever yet discovered. The mysteries of the Oseberg. From the late 8th to the mid-11th centuries, the Scandinavian peoples burst from their frontiers almost wherever the seas could take them. Through archaeology, now we can explore the world of Viking life by understanding the realm of the Viking dead. Strange blow history's winds at times, down the centuries. There is so much about the Vikings that we can't really understand. All we are left are traces and shades. The full spectrum, so far, remains unrevealed by time and the earth. What is left to us from those times and those people is usually connected with death. The time when the living mark the passing of the dead into the next world. And for us, into the archaeological record. This is the story of an incredible burial, and of individuals whose lives and importance we can only wonder at, from the fragments which remain of their passing into that next world.
One of my specialist fields is the Viking way of death. I'm really interested in how and why they deal with mortality. Oseberg is the most spectacular Viking burial ever found. That's not just a sort of empty superlative, it's literally true.
Oseberg, or Oseberg, was the name given to the beautiful ship buried with its amazingly well-preserved cargo more than 1,000 years ago. It was discovered at the dawn of the 20th century. The excavation was one of the first worldwide archaeological sensations, and this almost 2 decades before Howard Carter opened Tutankhamun's tomb.
One of the most famous excavations of the 20th century, and now we know it as a nationally important symbol of the whole of Norway. And internationally, it's like famous around the world. It is the iconic Viking ship. Whenever we see Viking ships, we see some sort of representation of this ship.
The Oseberg boat, with its distinct serpent stem head, was raised from the ground in the summer of 1904. Anaerobic conditions in the grave meant that, very unusually, organic objects were incredibly well preserved. There were staggering finds of hundreds of objects: wood, bone, leather, and even textiles. Yet amid all this, in the whole ship, there were found just 2 human skeletons of 2 women. The remains were proclaimed those of the 11th century Norwegian queen Ursa and her servant or slave. Norway had its legendary queen reborn in the new 20th century. And the ship. It was a number of years before the ship was carefully conserved and finally reconstructed. It became known as the Oseberg. It's the first time archaeologist Tim Sutherland has seen the Oseberg boat at first hand.
It is a beautiful thing. What a stunning ship.
The boat is 21.5 metres long and just over 5 metres broad, and made almost entirely from oak.
It is breathtaking, absolutely stunning. The size and the scale of it, it's immense. And in a building like this, it just suits it so nicely because it was made for this ship.
In fact, the museum was specially designed to house the Oseberg and its fellow grave ship, the Gokstad. For decades, archaeologists focused on the amazing preservation of the ship and the artefacts. The skeletons of the two women, by comparison, were all but forgotten. After they were measured and recorded, little more could be done with them. But they were supposedly Norwegian royals, however ancient, so they were reburied. There had never been any proof that the bones were those of Queen Ursa, and so, the evidence gone, the greatest mystery of the Oseberg went uninvestigated. Who were the two women? Why were they buried so grandly? Were they a queen and her servant? Were they both of royal blood? Or were they something else? In the early 21st century, moves were made to re-examine some of these questions. Norwegian archaeologists and osteologists revisited the story of the Oseberg and of the bones. Tonsberg archaeologist Terje Gonsum was instrumental in reopening the investigation. He and everyone else wanted to find out more about the two mysterious women.
Oseberg is very hard to understand, and things that are hard to understand can easily be mythical. And of course, it's intriguing.
In 2007, the skeletons were disinterred in the hope that modern science could reveal something more about the two individuals.
Good morning, ladies.
Ellen Marie Ness is the curator of the Oseberg exhibits in Oslo's Viking Ship Museum.
So here they are, the two ladies who were buried inside that ship. And I think it's so amazing that they're here, that we can see them, that we can study them, that we have them.
The skeletons were forensically re-examined to confirm their sex and, as far as possible, their age at the time of death.
And this one is the older one, and she managed to be incredibly old when she died, perhaps around 80. And the younger one, a young lady, around 50 or 60.
Good ages though for that period.
Absolutely, but you know, it's better to be rich and healthy than poor and sick. There are also so many things to learn from the bones.
The two women had certainly lived long lives relative to the times. Dendrochronology of the ship's timbers suggested the burial had taken place around the autumn of 834 AD. This meant that they had both been born prior to what we now consider the start of the Viking Age, around 793 AD. The two skeletons were incomplete, but from what remained, it was found that both had survived various injuries and ailments in their lives. But there was nothing to confirm what had killed either individual, although it was found that the older woman had suffered for some time with cancer. Analysis of the isotopes contained within their tooth enamel revealed that one of the women was probably Scandinavian in origin or descent, while the other, the older, may have descended from further east, possibly, though not certainly, from the region we now know as Iran. The story of the excavation to raise the Oseberg is also intriguing. Tim travels south from Oslo to see for himself the mysterious mound in which the ship burial rested for more than a millennium. Tonsberg is reputedly the oldest town in Norway. Bora, not far away, seems to have been an area for royal burials. Numerous mounds have been found here. But the Oseberg mound is on its own, well away from here, and not in any known burial ground. Perhaps that's why for so long it lay untouched.
Now you see the valley, right? You have the church straight in front of you.
Yeah.
And it slopes down on both sides.
Yeah, there it is.
And there it is.
Tim's being shown around by local Tonsberg historian Thor Hoidvin. He studied the story of the burial's discovery and the archaeological dig which followed. It's a strange tale, with its own blend of myth, folklore, and superstition. The mound itself isn't exactly hidden, but nor is it in a prominent position in the broad, shallow valley. It's low down, tucked away by a small, winding creek.
What a bizarre place to put a burial mound.
Yes.
When you've got so many sort of high places that are outcrops of rock and things all the way around.
Yeah.
You know, if you wanted to do something out of the way, you could, or more prominent, you put them on the higher ground.
The mound remained intact and half forgotten for centuries after the Vikings. Such places were suspected to contain ancient burials, but later generations were wary of digging into them, lest dire consequences should befall them.
Everybody thought that this was a burial site from the Black Plague. If you started to dig in it, you would dig up the pest.
Yep.
And of course, all of Norway would die again.
Fear of the medieval pestilence meant that the mound remained undisturbed until almost the end of the 19th century.
Then in the late 1800s, there comes a farmer, Johannes Hansen.
Little is known about Hansen. He moved to Tonsberg to farm the rich land here. Yet like his forebears in the Viking Age, he was, it seems, no stranger to the sea.
He was not only a farmer, he was also a seaman, a sailor. And he used for periods of time to travel to the United States to be skipper on a barge on the river in New York City.
Hansen was a pilot, guiding the great sailing boats on the Hudson River. And like many sailors of all eras, he was superstitious.
Like many others, he was visiting a fortune teller there.
Yeah.
The fortune teller asked Hansen why on earth he'd come to New York, when the fortune he sought was back home on his farm in Norway, in the mysterious mound, the supposed plague burial.
So he went back home and he started trying to dig a little bit. And he used a long iron rod. And all that came out was some yellow stinking water, which of course made the local population say that,
Yeah.
what have we told you?
We told you so. Stop doing it.
This is the Black Plague. You stop doing this.
Whether or not it had to do with the foul effluent from the mound, Hansen soon after caught sick and died. The stage was then set for the next important character in the story. Around the year 1900, a man named Oscar Rom purchased the farm. It's not known if he did so because of the mound and its stories.
He buys the farm. He must have had a hunch, because he started systematically to excavate the mound. And in the summer of 1903, on Friday, the 7th of August in 1903, he comes home to his family, drenched in clay and very dirty, but very happy because he has with him a piece of wood with intricate carvings on it.
So far as anyone can be sure, this piece of wood was the first fragment recovered from the burial beneath the mound. Rome could have no clue exactly what it was yet, but it was a sample of what was yet to come. He had to try and gain the interest of Norway's top archaeologist, and he didn't waste any time.
And the next day, which was a very extremely hot August day in 1903, he takes the steamboat into Christiania, as Oslo was called at that time. And he walks the short way from the quayside up to the relatively new-built Cultural Institute. And he walks in, and there sits Professor Gabriel Gustafsson.
Gustafsson was actually Swedish. He was already well respected in Oslo's Cultural Institute, but he could have no idea that what Oscar Rome brought him that warm day would lead to him becoming one of the most celebrated archaeologists in the world.
This farmer, Oscar, comes in and says, I think I have found something very interesting on my property. And then Oscar takes out the piece of wood and shows it to him. And then the professor came to life.
Gustafsson was hooked. The very next day, his birthday, he travelled to see the mound for himself, and the process was set in motion. The Oseberg boat and its silent passengers would be revealed. News of the Oseberg and its treasures spread far and wide as word got out among archaeologists and people interested in Viking history. Archaeology itself was changing at the time, from the leisurely pursuit of amateur antiquarians to something more scientific. It's because of this that there are other treasures from the Oseberg, which help now to tell the story of this incredible dig. To see for himself, Tim heads to the Cultural Institute, where Professor Gustafsson worked. Here in the vault are the dig archives from the excavation. They're almost as important as the artefacts and the ship itself.
This is the documentation from the excavation at Oseberg in 1904. This is Gustafsson's diaries, and this is his sketchbooks.
Anna-Britt Halvorsen is the archivist in charge of this unique trove in Norway's archaeological heritage.
So these are his day-to-day thoughts and what he was doing and what his plans might be.
Yes, it is.
Contained in the notes are traces of the character of an archaeologist who perhaps knew he was working on the most important dig of his life.
You can see that he has just grabbed the book because it's sometimes upside down, and but he dates every.
And of course, this is exactly what we do today. A lot of it is now done digitally, so it's fantastic that these still exist, and it's how he carried out the excavation. This is presumably the excavation trench, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Yeah.
And it also inside the ship, so it's 9, 10, 11. So we cut it into sections.
Yes.
And excavated
ABC,
it.
A1, 2. Yeah.
And vertically as well. And it's not that different to the way we would do it today, but obviously now we have modern techniques and digital instruments.
Yes, but this is quite modern techniques actually. Writing it all down, having artists drawing.
I think what's really important about this is that these are the first days, the first minutes of the excavations, and of course this went on to be a nationally important site. So is this where all this took place then?
Yes, this building was actually quite new in 1904. They just opened for the public.
These are the very same offices where the professor was dozing that afternoon, hardly expecting what was to happen over the next weeks and months.
And of course it was initially something brought in by a farmer. It was something that could have been something and nothing, but it turned into something massive, something nationally important.
Yeah, this is very important because this is what the farmer, Oskar Rom, this is the wooden piece that he brought to Gustafsson here at his office.
You can just imagine it. It's a hot day, he's waiting to go home, and somebody comes into the office with a piece of wood that's potentially going to change his life. And little does he know what it's going to turn into, but that was the day that literally changed his life. His eyes must have opened and he goes,
Okay, yeah.
This is quite important.
I have to check this out.
It started with one piece of wood,
Yeah.
but it turned out to be something that is now iconic.
Absolutely.
More than 100 years after the excavation, the Oseberg still has a major international appeal. Many of the artefacts, too, are now displayed here in the Viking Ship Museum. There are so many, though, that even more are kept in store. For some items, the conservation process is still going on. It's fascinating to compare some of these pieces with the drawings in the dig archive. Perhaps most of all, the carved piece of wood that first aroused Gustafsson's curiosity. It's actually the very top of one of the Oseberg's distinctive serpent stem heads. In fact, the artefacts are dominated by animal imagery. Among the most striking are 4 figureheads. They're carved from wood in incredible detail, each one different. Leopards, lizards, or a dragon's head. Like the serpent stem heads of the ship itself, they're famous and almost everywhere you look in the imagery and lore of the Viking Age. What makes the Oseberg artifacts so special is that the vast majority of them are of organic material, mostly wood, bone, or textiles. It's very rare that these kinds of materials survive so long in the grave.
Something we tend to forget when we think of the Viking concept of value is textiles. Textiles are very, very time-consuming to make. Other kinds of materials, particularly silk, very expensive. And we know from some of the burials of the Viking Age that really, really flashy clothing, covered in silk, lots of different colours and textures, things that would catch the light when you're in a firelit hall, clothes that would shimmer and glow. That is another kind of wealth, and a very important one.
As well as the boat itself, the dead were provided also with other means of transport. There are several sleds, and the largest item, a large wooden cart. Maybe the 2 women, advanced in years or too sick or infirm to walk, used these in life. Again, everything is ornately carved, and on the cart is depicted the goddess Freya, who it's said also had a carriage, pulled by cats. The many animal carvings, the goddess imagery. Did the women have a spiritual or shaman-like importance, beyond conventional status through wealth?
There's a lot of that equipment that is not easy to explain, because it's a lot of things is not just functional, they're quite symbolic. And you have a lot of things preserved that we haven't seen before. And of course, it's intriguing when 2 women have all this equipment, and it's placed in the landscape, and it's hard to try to compare it with other finds, because it's unique.
As well as the sketches that were made, many of these artifacts were also recorded in a different way. One that in 1905 was a technology very new to archaeology. Photography had been around for over half a century, but it was only really now that cameras were becoming practical enough to use as a means of accurate documentary recording. Photographs were taken during the excavation. They not only record the event, for us now, they're glimpses of a lost world, and of some of the first modern archaeologists.
So what we are looking at is some of the photos that they took at excavation, and back then in 1904 it was really something to spend so much resources on taking photos. That's the remains of the burial chamber, the steering oar, the prow. It's a wonderful quality, and it tells us so much.
They're black and white, large format slides, so they contain a huge amount of detail.
You can also see that the scale of it, I mean, that's a huge mound. It's a very deep hole it's in, and they've not taken the whole mound away, they've just dug a hole into the middle of it, haven't they?
And that's
really?
why it's so nice when they have some people on the photos, because it gives an idea of the size.
Yeah. There is a lot to see in it. I mean, there's obviously the ship, but there's the cut of the excavation, and there's all the tools and the people and all sorts of things lying around. It's a really good story about what's actually happening there. And what's really amazing is you can see the conservation here. I mean, you can see the prow of the ship, and you see all the carving down it there. And it just looks like it looks now. It's unbelievable
look at
state of
It's wonderful.
preservation.
Being able to see the famous artifacts just as they were unearthed and before they were lifted gives valuable insight for archaeologists.
They also took some pictures of work in progress, like this mess. And when you look at that closely, you can see what you see. It's actually one of the animal poles.
Yeah.
But today we take hundreds of pictures every day and just snapshots of everything.
Yeah.
But back then, every picture had a price.
Yeah, and every picture took a long time to take.
Yeah.
You didn't just walk up, take it and walk away. It took a long time to prepare it.
And it's so valuable for us today.
Photographs of the dig and the artefacts went around the world. But while people marvelled at the grave goods and the ship, the site of the excavation, the mound itself, was forgotten. Terje Garnsom has been intrigued by the Oseberg burial since childhood. He studied Gustafsson's archive more than anyone. But it's not just the amount of records that Gustafsson kept. It's the kind of things he recorded that Terje found so useful.
Gustafsson was very into having a biologist along. Geologist was also there. And a lot of different fields of expertise were collaborating here.
That's very forward-thinking for his time then, isn't it?
Yeah, and we should be very grateful that it was the Swedish Gustafsson who actually did the excavation, and he was a lot more advanced than the Norwegian archaeologist used to be.
Gustafsson had trained at Uppsala University, and he'd gained a wealth of experience excavating many Viking Age sites in Sweden, where he'd learned new techniques.
Yeah.
So it's a lucky strike that he was the man.
Very fortunate, yeah.
The data collected by Gustafsson was so comprehensive that in conjunction with the new work done on the bones, Terje was able to interpret the funeral in which the nameless women were laid to rest.
We saw that we could divide the stages of the building process into several phases. And actually one of the phases ended up with an interpretation that half of the mound was built incorporating the ship, and the ship was standing out from that mound, and that is actually the ritual scene.
Terje believes the Oseberg ship was half buried like this. The front part of the mound deliberately left open, with the foreship exposed to the elements and visible to the living.
And it's in that foreship all the offerings and the rituals took place.
The bodies of the women were probably laid in a chamber or bed that might also have been left partly or completely open, almost like a state funeral, perhaps for people to view the bodies or pay their respects. The mound stayed half open like this for some time, perhaps half a year. They know this because of seed samples of flowers collected by Gustafsson's biologist. Those from the front part of the grave were of a different season to those in the enclosed rear part.
And now we can study the archaeology of the archaeology. And it's by having notes like this you can actually do this. Otherwise, we wouldn't have a clue, would we, really?
No, we had to just settle with artifacts and treat the mound as a container. But now we can see that the mound is a construction, very much linked to all the action taking place.
Whether they took place in one great ceremony or several over the most part of a year, the funeral rites must have been impressive.
Every Viking funeral was different. We can classify them into groups, so you have boat burials or what we call chamber graves. They're kind of little underground rooms where you put the dead, sometimes seated in chairs. But when you go inside those graves, what they actually do for just this dead person on this occasion, in this place, is always individual. If you look at the objects, what they do with them, where are they placed in the grave, how? Sometimes you can get a sequence of actions. You can reconstruct how that grave was made. And then with our imaginations, and sometimes from written sources as well, you can fill in the blanks of, well, what was going on? Were they talking? Were they singing? Was it at night? Some of the graves you find evidence for big bonfires and things. Some written descriptions we have, eyewitness accounts of Viking funerals, are at night. The effects of firelight in darkness can be very dramatic.
As well as the myriad objects, decorations and implements, many animals were also consigned to the Oseberg grave. The noises, sights and smells must have been intense. It's hard for us to imagine the impact of all of this on those who were taking part.
There are whole worlds of belief and shades of belief. Different people thinking different things, just as at our funerals. You know, do you love the dead person? Did you hate them? Is it an act of duty? You know, looking at your watch. The Vikings did that too, but they did it in different ways to us. And how people view death, how they construct death, because these funerals are deliberate, they can tell us a lot about how they viewed life, and that's what interests me.
If the wealth of the rituals and the value of the offerings reflect the individuals, then we can assume the two women were of high status. But in what way? A queen and her servant or slave, as the Norwegians decided after the excavation?
If you really look into forensic and archaeology, there's nothing different between those other than age. And of course, it could be mother and daughter. We can't tell because the DNA doesn't give us any real answers yet. So actually, I really don't know how to decide which position in the society these two women had. Where of course they are on the highest level of society, but what kind of role did they play? I'm not sure, but they might be connected to rituals and to religion. They might be connected to the aristocracy, but in what proportion these different roles are mixed, I'm not certain. Still a mystery.
The two women of Oseberg are a mystery in every sense. Personally, I think the most important thing is that the grave is that of women. This itself tells us something about who they were and how they were regarded in society.
We know very little about women at the highest levels of Viking society. The word queen might not even be accurate.
We can't really say if the Oseberg burial are about secular or religious power. There have been theories on both of them, both the queen theory and the more sorceress theories. But I think that one thing that we tend to do in modern society, that we separate the secular and the religious spheres of society. But I don't think that necessarily was the case in the Viking Age, and that secular and religious power were really connected. To separate them, I think it will probably be wrong.
The women were clearly special to the people who buried them, but perhaps beyond royalty alone as we would understand it now. There's something more religious, shamanic even, suggested by the animistic imagery of the artefacts, and even of the serpent stem heads of the ship itself. At first there was a theory that the Oseberg might only have been built for the grave, yet dendrochronology revealed it had been built many miles away in another part of Norway, and it had probably sailed for more than a decade.
So where did it all start then?
We really wanted to take back our heritage, and that's how the idea of building an archaeological replica of the Oseberg ship came about.
The saga Oseberg was begun in 2010 and took 2 years to build here on the quayside in Tonsberg.
So how important do you feel it is for Norway to have a really good replica of the Oseberg ship?
I think it's very important, and for several kinds of reasons. And we have learned a lot on how they really constructed Viking ships, how they were built, and also, I mean, our own pride in our history and knowledge of the history. That has gotten quite a boost as well.
So that's fantastic. The Oseberg ship is a symbol of almost Vikings everywhere.
The King and Queen of Norway were present at the launch, and the replica now sails the fjord and sea just like its forebear more than 1,000 years ago.
Oh, yeah, you can actually. We're about 10 metres from here, and the first thing that strikes you is not just the visual appearance, but also the smell. It's a very peaty, sort of earthy smell, and it's
wonderful.
It's fantastic. Is it okay if we go on board?
Yeah, be my guest.
Excellent. Thanks very much.
Ulearald Flaten is the saga Oseberg's skipper.
Prepare for the time machine, stepping 1200 years back in time.
That'll do me. That'll do me. It's very stable, isn't it? I mean, it's such a huge ship. And it's a lot broader than I thought. You can really get a sense of how wide it is.
Yeah.
Oh, it's gorgeous.
Yeah.
It is. It's a beautiful smell. But you can imagine why it smells, because it's all the wood, the different timbers, the ropes, all the tar, and originally all the rigging and the canvas or whatever. Oh, it's made of sheep's wool, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
The original sail. It's fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. It's almost unbelievable, you know, standing here on a perfect replica of the Oseberg ship, even down to the detail in the figurehead. And it's stunningly beautiful. All around the world, whenever you see stories of Vikings, you see that figurehead up there, don't you?
It's an exact replica of the original, not only in its overall structure. Every strake and plank was carefully copied, right down to the smallest detail, including the ship's many intricate carvings. These too have been preserved, leaving some interesting clues about the boat and the women who were buried but also might have sailed aboard it. The DNA analysis of the older woman revealed that it was possible she'd suffered a condition which gave her masculine traits in later life, including maybe facial hair.
1200 years ago, this was a burial ship, and aboard the ship was two women. One of them was around 80 years old. She was walking like this, and she had a disease which made her quite male. She had very deep voice and a beard. I see you...
Not the most beautiful of women then.
But I think quite powerful.
Possibly, yeah.
And we think that this woman is the owner of the ship. You see, it's a woman.
Ah, yes.
And you see, she has a
beard. Yeah.
So maybe
that's her then.
That's her.
We know in some cultures, powerful women were sometimes depicted with a beard to appear more masculine. So it could be symbolic, or it could just be coincidence.
And in a prominent place as well, right on the prow, facing the crew. So definitely an important image.
Absolutely.
Some of the carvings were much more personal and a real bonus for archaeologists to discover on the original.
But I will show you something, because you won't see this at the original because it's well hidden.
So, wow, that's original?
Yeah, that's original.
That's a copy of the original carving?
Yeah, that's Viking graffiti.
But it's not just any old graffiti, is it? That is, without a doubt, this ship.
Yeah.
So somebody's drawn a picture of this ship on one of the planks of this ship.
Yeah.
That is unbelievable. And it's
maybe they had some spare time and had to do something, or maybe it's a ritual. We don't know.
It's almost as if they're doodling.
Yeah, it is.
Just sketching and had time to spare. That's really, really nice. I like that. And that's without a doubt, isn't it? I mean, you can tell the way all the lines are drawn. This is definitely this prow.
I'll show you one more thing.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Better than that?
Maybe.
On some excavated boats, carvings have been found, perhaps by the builders or members of the crew, of the outline of a hand or a foot, almost like a signature.
I told you the owner of this ship was quite a small lady. And here,
oh, look at that.
Here we have a carving of a foot. And it's quite a small foot.
The carving is comparable in size to leather shoes from the grave, which show signs of having been used before the burial.
There are some sites especially in Scotland, for example, they apply carvings of feet
Yeah.
to quite significant places.
Yeah.
That would be so nice to think that that was her foot, wouldn't it?
It would.
One of the greatest mysteries of the Oseberg burial, beyond the ship, the artefacts and the skeletons, is where it was commended to the ground. This part of Norway isn't remote or a wilderness. In the Viking Age, it was much the same as it is now, just farmland.
So you don't know why the mound is there?
No,
Not at all?
No, it's no roads there. We can't connect it to any communication route, and that is the most obvious thing with other rich grey mounds.
Yeah.
And it's not directly linked to a farm. It's like a black hole.
Yeah.
We have tried a lot of different angles and methods, but to be honest, I really don't know how on earth they chose that place. You can say that the mound is a monument, but it's put in an anti-monumental place.
Yeah.
Lowest part in the valley, not visible from very many places from that valley.
Archaeology showed the boats had been dragged over land to this spot. The timber they had used to do this was still beneath the keel.
So it's an active choice putting it down in that valley, but we can't really know why.
So it may be that something that is under even what's left of the mound and the former excavated trench that they put the ship in. There may be something under the whole thing that would tell us why they did it. But at the
Maybe
moment,
and maybe not, because
Whatever reason the location was chosen, another clue in the dig archive suggests that one thing was for sure. The two women were meant to remain right there, right where they were buried.
You always hear that, well, the Vikings, they buried people in a boat so that they could sail into the kingdom of death, but not the two ladies. They were supposed to stay put in the grave. I mean, look at the size of the stone.
and that's the anchor. Do you think that's the real anchor stone?
It's not an anchor stone, it's just made for the funeral.
So this looks like it was meant to tie that ship to the ground in that location.
Certainly look like.
It's huge.
And it's so interesting why those two ladies shouldn't leave.
That's interesting, isn't it?
So they were supposed to stay there forever.
Leaders, spiritual figures, witches. Perhaps all of these at once. Buried in a beautiful boat, but moored to that place, tied into the grave for some reason. DNA and other analysis in years to come may well reveal more about the two women, but we're unlikely ever to know all the answers.
I think that the key to this is to unpack our assumptions, not to be so sure, so ready to come to conclusions about these graves, and instead to try and begin with what they are, the collections of objects, the particular combinations of people and things and actions at a particular place and a particular time, and then work from there. They clearly belong in the grave. This was their place to be.
The burial ship of the Oseberg weaves its mysteries yet.